The morning mist hung thick over the alien jungle as the convoy of 6 armored transport vehicles pushed through the narrow mountain pass. Sergeant Marcus Chen sat in the lead vehicle, his eyes scanning the dense blue forest that pressed against both sides of the dirt road. Something felt wrong today. The birds had stopped singing, and the usual sounds of the jungle had fallen silent. The convoy carried medical supplies and food rations for the forward research base located 50 kilometers north. It was supposed to be a routine supply run through territory that had been peaceful for months. The Na'vi tribes in this region had shown no hostility toward human settlers. But Marcus had learned long ago that peace could shatter in seconds. Behind him, Private Sarah Torres checked her rifle for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. She was young, barely 22 years old, and this was only her 2nd month on Pandora. The massive trees towered above them like ancient guardians, their bioluminescent leaves beginning to glow softly in the morning light. Corporal James Wright drove the 2nd vehicle, his hands steady on the wheel despite the rough terrain. He had served on 3 different colony worlds before being assigned to Pandora. Nothing had prepared him for the beauty and danger of this place. The air itself seemed alive with strange particles that floated like golden dust in the sunlight filtering through the canopy. The convoy commander, Lieutenant Elena Vasquez, sat in the 3rd vehicle, monitoring communications and tracking their progress on the tactical display. She had been on Pandora for 4 years and understood the delicate balance between human expansion and Na'vi territory. The peace agreements were fragile, held together by mutual respect and careful diplomacy. What none of them knew was that a band of rogue Na'vi warriors had been tracking them since dawn. These were not the peaceful tribes that had signed treaties with the human colonists. These were warriors from the deep jungle, led by a fierce hunter named Suti, who believed that every human on Pandora was an invader that needed to be eliminated. Suti watched from his position high in the trees, his yellow eyes fixed on the slow-moving convoy below. 40 warriors waited silently around him, their bows drawn and their arrows tipped with neurotoxin. The poison was powerful enough to kill a human within seconds. There would be no survivors today. He raised his hand and gave the signal. The first wave of arrows struck without warning. They punched through the thin armor plating of the lead vehicle with terrifying precision. Marcus felt something burn through his shoulder and looked down to see a black arrow embedded in his flesh. The world began to spin as the toxin entered his bloodstream. Sarah screamed as arrows shattered the windows around her. She tried to raise her rifle, but her arms refused to obey. The poison was already spreading through her veins, shutting down her nervous system 1 synapse at a time. She slumped against the seat, her vision fading to black. The 2nd vehicle swerved off the road as James took an arrow to the neck. The transport crashed into a massive tree root and flipped onto its side. Warriors descended from above, their bodies painted with war symbols, their faces twisted with hatred for the invaders who had come to steal their world. Elena watched in horror as her convoy was torn apart in seconds. She grabbed the emergency radio and screamed for help, but static was the only response. The Na'vi had jammed their communications somehow. She reached for her sidearm, determined to fight until her last breath. But the arrows found her too. 3 of them pierced her chest before she could fire a single shot. She fell back in her seat, the tactical display flickering and dying as her blood pooled on the floor. The lieutenant closed her eyes and thought of her family back on Earth, wondering if they would ever know what happened to her. The Na'vi warriors moved through the wreckage with practiced efficiency. They checked each body, ensuring that no human still breathed. Suti jumped down from the trees and walked among the dead, satisfaction burning in his eyes. This was justice for his people. This was revenge for the forests that had been burned and the mountains that had been mined. He approached the lead vehicle and looked at the bodies inside. The driver and passenger appeared dead, their eyes closed, their bodies still. Sudi turned away and began organizing his warriors to strip the convoy of useful supplies. They would take the weapons and the food. Everything else would be burned. What Sudi did not see was the slight movement of Marcus Chun's finger. What he did not know was that human medicine had evolved beyond anything the Na'vi could imagine. What he did not understand was that every soldier in that convoy carried a nano-injection system that deployed automatically when their vital signs dropped to critical levels. The nanobots were already at work inside Marcus's body, breaking down the toxin molecule by molecule. His heart, which had stopped for nearly 2 minutes, began to beat again. His lungs expanded with a shallow breath. His eyes remained closed, but his brain was fully awake, processing everything around him. Across the convoy, the same miracle was happening in other bodies. Sarah's nanobots were repairing the damage to her nervous system. James's neck wound was closing as microscopic machines stitched tissue back together. Even Elena, whose injuries were the most severe, was slowly being pulled back from death's door. Marcus waited. He could hear the Na'vi moving around the vehicles, speaking in their strange language. He could smell the smoke as they began setting fire to supply crates. He counted the footsteps and estimated their positions. Training took over where consciousness had failed. His body remembered what to do even when his mind was still recovering. 15 minutes passed. The nanobots completed their primary mission and flooded his system with adrenaline and combat stimulants. Marcus's eyes snapped open. His hand found his rifle in the same motion. He burst from the vehicle with a speed that caught the nearest warrior completely by surprise. The first shot took down a Na'vi archer before anyone understood what was happening. The second shot dropped a warrior who was reaching for his knife. Marcus moved like water, flowing from cover to cover, firing with deadly precision. His shoulder still burned, but the pain felt distant, blocked by the chemicals coursing through his blood. Sudi spun around at the sound of gunfire. His eyes widened as he saw the human soldier he had personally watched die now, cutting through his warriors. This was impossible. No creature could survive their poison. No being could return from death itself. Sarah emerged from the first vehicle, her rifle chattering in controlled bursts. She was shaking, terrified, but her training held. She picked targets and eliminated them with the efficiency that had been drilled into her during months of combat simulation. The Na'vi fell back, shocked by this impossible resurrection. James kicked open the door of his overturned vehicle and crawled out into the chaos. His neck still felt strange, like something was moving beneath his skin, but he could function. He could fight. He grabbed his fallen weapon and added his fire to the counterattack that was tearing through the ambush party. Elena was the last to rise. She pulled herself from the third vehicle with blood still wet on her uniform. 3 arrows still protruded from her chest, but the wounds beneath them had closed. She limped forward, her pistol raised, and shot a warrior who was trying to flank Marcus. The Na'vi broke. They had expected easy prey, not soldiers who could rise from death. Sudi shouted commands, but his warriors were already scattering into the jungle, their courage shattered by what they had witnessed. 40 warriors had descended from the trees. Fewer than 10 managed to escape. Sudi stood alone in the clearing, his bow hanging useless at his side. He stared at Marcus Chun as the human walked toward him, rifle raised. The sergeant's eyes were cold but not cruel. There was something in them that Sudi had never seen before in a human, something that might have been sadness. Marcus lowered his weapon. The Na'vi chieftain tensed, expecting a trick. But the human simply stood there, breathing heavily, blood dripping from his wounded shoulder. The sergeant spoke slowly, knowing the Na'vi warrior might understand some human words. He explained that they had not come to steal. They had come to build. He told Sudi about the medical supplies in the convoy, meant for a research base that studied Pandora's diseases. He spoke of doctors who wanted to help both humans and Na'vi live together on this world. Sudi did not respond. His yellow eyes remained fixed on the soldiers who had conquered death. He thought about his ancestors and their teachings. He thought about the old stories of spirits who could not be killed. Perhaps these humans were more than simple invaders. Perhaps they were something else entirely. The warrior turned and disappeared into the jungle without a word. Marcus watched him go, making no move to stop him. Sarah asked why he had let the enemy escape. The sergeant simply shook his head and began checking on his wounded comrades. Elena called for evacuation on the now functioning radio. Apparently, the jamming had stopped when the Na'vi fled. A rescue team would arrive within the hour. Until then, they would secure the area and salvage what they could from the convoy. James sat down on a fallen log and stared at his hands. They were shaking. The reality of what had happened was beginning to sink in. They had all died out there on that mountain road. They had all come back. Nothing in his training had prepared him for this feeling. Sarah joined him, her own hands trembling. She asked if he believed in miracles. James laughed weakly and said he believed in good medicine. But deep down, he was not so sure. Something had changed inside him during those dark moments between death and resurrection. Something he could not explain. Marcus gathered them together as the sound of approaching helicopters echoed through the jungle. They had survived the unsurvivable. They had fought back from the very edge of oblivion. The Na'vi had thought today would be a day of victory. Instead, it had become a lesson that would echo across Pandora for generations. Humans could die, but humans did not stay dead. The rescue helicopters touched down in the clearing as the morning mist finally burned away. The soldiers climbed aboard, carrying their wounded and their dead equipment. They left behind burning wreckage and Na'vi bodies that would never be recovered. As the helicopters rose above the jungle canopy, Marcus looked down at the place where he had died and been reborn. Somewhere below, Suti was running back to his tribe with a story that would change everything. The Na'vi would learn to fear the humans who could rise from death. And perhaps, in time, that fear would turn to respect. The convoy had been destroyed. The mission had failed. But the humans had survived. Against all odds, against impossible poison and overwhelming numbers, they had clawed their way back from the darkness and emerged victorious. Today, no human was supposed to survive. Today, all of them had.